I just want to let you guys know I wanted that photo to sink in real good for you because I want you to think about the fact that Jerry Rice probably isn't hurting for money. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Jerry Rice did okay with his NFL earnings and his endorsements. I am not a Niner fan, even though I am from the Bay Area. The thumbnail of the intro video that I'll be showing in a second has my favorite team, the Denver Broncos, and Marlon Briscoe in it. But I always will remember Jerry Rice, not for the 4 Super Bowl rings, or I'm sorry, 3 Super Bowl rings. No, I'll remember that Popeyes chicken helmet because he has great management. There's no excuse for the Popeyes chicken helmet. And on that note, let me bring in my homie, my dog. We are the Crockett and Tubbs of the podcast world. Well, maybe not Crockett and Tubbs. That means one of us has to be white. So I'm going to be the Philip Michael Thomas, and Pascal is going to be the Don Johnson. Pascal Robert.
I got to be the blonde-haired white boy.
Hey, you have great facial hair. If you're Don Johnson and you got away with wearing a turquoise T-shirt and a white suit after Labor Day for like 4 years.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
We do have a special treat because we are going to be talking about sports. This gentleman and I definitely have long sports discussions when it is college football season. We go back and forth. I am a Pac-10/12 loyalist. He, of course, being from punk-ass Ohio, is a Big Ten loyalist. I'm going to stop talking about Ohio. It's a wonderful state. It's a wonderful state. I've been to Cincinnati, and we'll just leave it at that. Marcus from the Left Flank Vets.
Yes.
Marcus, what is that? That's solutions you selling your part-time? What?
Yeah, exactly. The triple X, they got the 2X, and the 1X, you get 2 for $5.
Look at that. That's a real fan. That's why I respect Marcus, because Marcus is a real fan.
You gotta have something on deck.
Disagreements is actually so. What makes it even more fun if you throw David Griscom from Left Reckoning, because he's a Big 12 loyalist because he's from Texas. There are some great football conversations that we get to have. Now, before we bring in the man of the hour, we've been making these intro videos. Last time he was on, we didn't make an intro video, so I want our guest to know that I was up all night. Pascal, I had to make sure the words were just right for this intro video to hit. I put in some old school footage. I want to know if he recognizes any of these players. So here is the intro video for our show today, Race Sports in the Ruling Class.
What are you trying to accomplish? What would you like this game for you?
That's basically. Ultimately, it's to bring awareness and make people, realize what's really going on in this country. There are a lot of things that are going on that are unjust. People aren't being held accountable for, and that's something that needs to change. That's something that, this country stands for: freedom, liberty, justice for all, and it's not happening for all right now.
Like all forms of entertainment in the United States, sports has a peculiar way in which racial identity is showcased, often to maintain the hierarchies that plague American society. In this episode, we will examine racism in sports and ask, does the utility of race in American sports serve the needs of the ruling class? This is Revolution.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Muhammad Ali has just refused to be inducted into the United States Armed Forces.
Continue to sit?
Yes, I'll continue to sit. I'm going to continue to stand with the people that are being oppressed. To me, this is something that has to change. And when there's significant change, and I feel like that flag represents what it's supposed to represent, and this country is representing people the way that it's supposed to, I'll stand.
For those who don't know the backstory, Laura Ingraham from Fox News, when LeBron expressed some criticisms of the president, criticisms that weren't wrong, and even if she disagreed with him, LeBron probably paid more taxes than she does, right?
Absolutely.
So that's just what it is.
Right, he worth $500 million, they still paying nigga on his house.
You know what I'm saying? And so she said on air in her commentary, why can't he just shut up and dribble? And meanwhile, this is the same network. Bullshit you not. This is one of the funniest moments I've ever seen in television history. Is I was channel surfing and Ja Rule was on Fox News and they listed. I swear you could
We
go
need to
find
know what Ja Rule thinks.
I was like, yes, but LeBron has to shut up. They've had Fabio on as a political commentator,
Really?
but LeBron got to shut up and dribble. So I say all that to say, he said that the documentary was already in the works, and I was a commentator at that point, and once she said shut up and dribble, she put more money in everybody's pocket because that became the title of the documentary. It took on a bit of a kind of a different direction because it showed how in the history of basketball, from Bill Russell all the way through LeBron, that black athletes, in this case focused on basketball, have always been told that to shut up, entertain us. Don't remind us of your blackness. Be a black face, not a black voice. Like that's always been the history of black athletes. And just be grateful. Just be grateful we let you in the door and that we're allowing you to make this money.
You guys know our guest as one of the most influential people on the left. He is the author of several books. We just know him as Tere's daddy, Adolph Reed Jr.
Yeah, so you found the Rice photo. That's great. The only thing I have to say is he is from Mississippi. Just keep that in mind.
Hey, he been out of Mississippi for a minute.
True, but he is from Mississippi.
Why can't the brother just like Popeye's chicken, man?
No one should like chicken that much.
Well, see, I can't remember though. Like, wasn't that commercial before they hired that sister to do the ads?
He's in it with her, actually, if you remember. So that again, it doesn't, like, there's no nice way to look at it. It doesn't get any better. It's like both of them, like, love that chicken from Popeyes.
And he's like, does like the face mask, does it rotate the chicken wing so that he doesn't, and is that something that we can get with the next? Because this is your Christmas gift, Jason.
Right.
You don't think I can't? Someone's about to the 3D print the shit out of this chicken helmet.
Like that has to be that dude's lowest moment, where you hope at least one of his kids is like, Dad, you're better than this.
I hope so.
Is that as bad as the Mary J. Blige Kentucky Fried Chicken commercial? Y'all remember when Mary J. Blige did the commercial?
I do. I do, but like the helmet
makes it worse, and he's grinning.
And detox anyway. I mean, so like one of our 12 steps or some shit.
Oh man.
So your son called me. And we talked beforehand. And he reminded me, which I already knew, to bring up our favorite player, one of my favorite baseball players, Barry Bonds.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yep, I was a huge fan of Barry Bonds and a huge fan of his dad, too. And his dad made one of what his dad was star-crossed because he had an impossible task to fulfill, which was like he was drafted to replace Willie Mays in center field for the Giants. So I'm out
of that one.
And he had a great career, but he's also the author of one of the most biting and accurate lines that I've ever heard about with respect to, because the thing he always got for his entire career was hasn't lived up to his potential, hasn't lived up to his potential, hasn't lived up to his potential. And one day he got that question and he said to the reporter, "So, what does that mean exactly?" I said, I could say that you haven't won a Pulitzer, which means you hadn't lived up to your. Right? And I thought that was absolutely great, man. Because
the Bonds family, in my opinion, I always felt that Barry pushed back in a way that wasn't very popular at the time.
Yeah.
Because I think we were still coming out of an era where the proper athlete, and that's actually why I actually chose athletes that were quote unquote proper.
Yeah.
Jerry Rice didn't get into, Jackie Robinson,
Emmett Smith.
Emmett Smith. I mean, there's a long list, right? Michael Jordan.
Right.
And Bonds had an interesting pushback to me because he really called out the media for like racist shit they would say. And because the media at the time was a lot of people that didn't look like him.
Right.
He's the bad guy.
Right.
And he came up knowing that the media dogged his daddy out.
Right. That's exactly.
And his godfather, Willie Mays. Willie Mays was not welcomed in San Francisco. For people that don't know about Willie Mays' time in San Francisco, he was New York's boy.
Right. That's right.
Not our boy.
Right.
So sorry about that.
So I guess their favorite was McCovey, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, who's a hell of a ball player too. I mean, the Giants had some great teams in that era.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, at the same time, right? I mean, you probably read about this, but people like Frank Robinson and Clemente, right? It's not like you would say they were Rat Brown and Stokely Carmichael, but they demanded to be treated with a little dignity, right? As human beings, or as men, as one would say back in the day. And so I guess instead of Rat Brown and Stokely Carmichael, he was more like Duff. What's his name? On the Ivan Dixon character from Nothing But a Man.
Mm.
The Reds traded Frank Robinson at the height of his career. He was 29, and they said he was an old 29. So they traded him to Baltimore, where he promptly won the Triple Crown and the World Series. But the stories about him and Clemente both was that they would supposedly wear down in the late summer, like in August. And the story, I mean, I even heard the story at the time, when I was a kid, was that they supposedly were suffering from syphilis, right?
Oh.
And that's why their energy was sapped, right? I mean, late in the season. And it's just two people I ever heard that about, both great ball players. I mean, Clemente, one of the greatest ever. Well, both of them, really. And it just happened to be guys who demanded to be treated with a little dignity and respect. And it's not like they were assholes or anything like that, right? I mean, just and Gibson was another one. I mean, like that too. Right. But I mean, it was tough back in the day.
It was.
Are you trying to say that it's not tough now for the black athlete?
Well, tough.
Segregated hotels.
Yeah. Look, every now and then, I was talking to Touré about this not that long ago. Before I make that point, I was going to say, like I mentioned this to you before, Jason, when we were talking. But as at the height of the Bonds controversy, when all of the media were trying to get Hank Aaron to denounce him, which Aaron wouldn't. Shit, I'm blocking on his actual name now.
Josh Gibson?
Bobby Valentine.
Okay.
manager, and he's from Stamford, Connecticut. And the reason that I was blocking on his real name was that Touré always called him Tony Danzan, who's the boss.
He did remind me of that dude.
But what Valentine said was that he would be concerned about Bonds taking whatever Bonds supposedly had taken, if he were injecting it into his eyeballs, because it's his eyes that else was. So I thought that was cool. But yeah, but that one season, man, was unbelievable. I mean,
that was one of the greatest seasons I've ever seen.
Well, I think it's anybody's ever seen.
Oh yeah, regardless of whatever you want to say he was on. I don't know how Marcus and Pascal or even the chat feel about that. To watch a player at a certain level of mental maturity, right?
Yep.
And then have the be able to play a whole season,
right?
And I don't remember how many times he was walked with the bases loaded. Like, I'm not pitching to Barry Bonds.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
Like,
well, look, I mean, two things on that. One is Roger Maris almost had a nervous breakdown chasing the 60 home run mark, hitting dead pull line drives to a 296-foot right field fence. Right. And the pressure on Bonds was greater. And okay, so Maris is like a guy from South Dakota or whatever, and was playing for the Yankees. So the pressure is great there. But the other thing about it, though, is that Bonds, they just could not do anything with him, right? So walking him with the bases loaded was always a smart thing to do, right? Because no matter what the batting average was, the percentage was that if you didn't walk him, the worst was going to happen was that run on third base was going to score from sacrifice fly anyway.
Yeah.
Hey, so
and when you think about that, there were games that they won because they walked in a run.
That's right.
Like we'll take this L,
right,
but you're not gonna beat me because you hit a grand slam.
And that's some shit that I hadn't seen since the Cascade Youth Organization, but a Little League in 1979. Right, you walk in to win and run. But yeah, no, he's a hell of a ball player. Yeah, but going back to the question of how much worse it is or was. Actually, the reason I brought up Touré, what was it I was saying to him? Like, this isn't sports, but in talking about academics, we were saying, you sometimes wonder what it must have been like for somebody like Ernest Everett Just to be in the PhD program in chemistry at the University of Chicago in 1915, right? What that brother must have had to endure. And now, I mean, and granted, this is what old people always say, right? But I don't think that any of us alive now can even fathom, right? I mean, the kind of stuff that those people had to go through.
Like I can only imagine. Like I put some Bill Russell clips in there because Bill Russell played for Boston Celtics in the mid 50s. Did he start playing?
Yeah. He and Casey Jones won the national championship team at USF in 1955 and 56, I think. Yep.
Not the University of South Florida, Pascal, but San Francisco.
Yeah, that's right. The real one.
Yeah, the real one. The Jesuit University. I just want you to know.
Right. I mean, there you go.
Bay Area all day. Barry Bonds.
Is that school still open?
Hell yeah, it's still open.
Just messing around.
Does it have a basketball?
I'm just messing around.
No. Well, Marcus, you had a question you wanted to ask.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm just interested in what your take would be, I guess, on like where the class, or class background for modern day athletes, the difference between back then. Is this something that has an effect on especially Black athletes and their willingness to push against capital, push against authority?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in fact, I had a question for you too, Marcus. But we'll get to it later. But it's got to do with the progressive activity inside the military, because that's something you and I have a common history of too.
Oh, what? You served? I
Oh,
didn't know that.
Well, no, bro. I served on the other side. But I no, I mean, I was an organizer in the GI movement back in the Vietnam era.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, I've been able to hook up with some people from Veterans for Peace,
Yeah.
that have been, really much showing me the ropes as far as like being anti-war, anti-recruitment, stuff like that. So,
Yeah, cool. Well, yeah, I don't know if you've seen this documentary, Sir, No Sir, but it's about the anti-war movement in the Vietnam era in the military. It's quite good. Yeah, and a good friend of mine, guy who actually brought me in, runs all through it, Howard Levy. But anyway, yeah, back to the athletes and stuff. That's an interesting question. Like, I've seen a lot of anecdotal stuff about this. I've noticed a lot of anecdotal stuff. Like, I don't want to get all ADOS about this, but those Africans are starting to take all those basketball and football jobs too.
Will not replace us. And if Cass need to understand, I went to my cousin who lives about an hour and some change away, was in town a while back, and she said, Jason, I'm in Oakland at a basketball tournament. First of all, I was shocked little kids was playing basketball, and I was like, oh, your kids is playing basketball. Let me go see my nephew. I call them my nephews. And, I go see this tournament in East Oakland at a really nice, kind of a beautiful facility that was built just for tournaments.
Okay.
So first of all, the game is different. This is not Marcus goes to Columbus High and plays ball real well and gets recruited. No. You're getting personal training from a very young age. You're playing in traveling teams from a very young age. And if you don't have that,
forget it.
Yeah, you're not an elite athlete. And that's how we're making these elite athletes. So I'm seeing and he's like 9. Right? And he's playing like a 9-year-old plays. He's all over the place. There's a few kids that have some nice form that's pulling up and and shooting threes. I called Napoleon the Legend because he played basketball when he was younger in the East Coast. I'm like, man, this is blowing my mind. I'm seeing these kids, and it's an array of colors.
Yeah.
Now you can't be broke.
No.
To afford the travel, the tournament fees,
right,
the gear, and if you're lucky, the personal training. And I hope my good friend is watching this show, who's a coach at Oakland High, Coach Will Liu, that comes on the show sometimes. But one of the people that helps out the program, kind of out of the kindness of his heart, is a real high end. I think personal trainer is almost an understatement to what he does. He literally looks at your body and finds out what's wrong with you. Like he did some help at the homeless shelter I was at, and he could look at someone and be like, you twisted your ankle about 20 years ago, didn't you? No, he's like, because you're pronated to the left, and I can tell. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna start. And he would just break cats down, right? And he did a lot of that training for Dame. And what they do is, and he has these videos, I wish I had his permission, I'd show some of them, where they get kids dunking. Like, he's like, oh, we can get you dunking in give me 3 months.
Wow.
And we'll get you dunking. But it's like the kind of work they do so you don't, wear your body out and all this other stuff. I don't know if you remember Kobe Bryant, before he passed away, had remarked on the US game. He was like, you guys play too many games. Because no more is the athlete, and I don't know how the chat feels about this. I know we have parents in the chat. No more is the athlete where it's like, okay, it's baseball season to play baseball. You're not playing baseball, you're gonna run track. Not gonna run track, you're gonna play football. No, you play baseball year round and travel. You play, this year round and travel. It's It's on a whole nother level, and it really has. When I talked to my buddy about it, who coaches at Oakland High, which if you don't know anything about Oakland, it is not a prestigious high school, a public high school. So he's dealing with sometimes dropping off kids at the parole office. So that is a rough school, but the stories these guys tell me about what is needed to excel. And when we're looking at athletes now, me and Marcus were talking about this, these kids are just so pro ready. And my buddy was telling me, and then I'll shut up because I'm talking too much. My buddy was telling me, because he's still good with a lot of his players that are in the league, especially Dame. He said when the guys first got there, when Dame first got there, cats were falling asleep in the rookie meetings. Like now they got laptops out and they're asking these guys to speak for another 20, 40 minutes because they want to go over like branding and how to handle their money. And this is a whole new athlete. And that Broke documentary that came out on ESPN, while interesting, kind of is talking about a person that I don't want to say doesn't exist anymore, but they're fading away.
Right.
And LeBron James is showing it. Magic Johnson is showing us. Like Magic Johnson just isn't a real estate mogul, but he is someone that has finagled some real political power in Los Angeles.
Yeah, it's funny. My cousin, my youngest first cousin, who was only 2 years older than Touré, is the director of Magic Johnson Enterprises.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, you have to edit this out.
No, I was going to say, man, like I remember like the first little leaguer who made it to the majors was when I was a kid. He's a pitcher named Joey J. He came up with the Braves when they were they're still in Milwaukee. Born in 1935, he came up in mid to late 50s or something. And I recall that Oral Hershiser was the first person I'd ever heard of anyway, whose father or parents, shouldn't be sexist about it, hired a personal pitching coach for him when he was like 10 or 11 or some shit. And when that happened, I thought, oh, wait, the game's going to change now. And you saw it a lot in baseball, but like the sons and the grandsons, and then eventually the great-grandsons of major leaguers were in the major leagues. And the first black version of that was Jerry Hairston, whose grandfather, Sam, had played in the majors, had played, I think, for the White Sox in the 50s or something like that. So without regard to race, of course, but that's not the point. Well, I mean, either way, I mean, this, there's enough money. So like this kind of thing wouldn't happen when you played whatever your pro sports was and then worked in a feed store like in the off season because you weren't making any money, right? But now that the stakes are high enough that upper middle class people can afford, to do what the Williams's father did, basically, or can hire other people to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That it makes sense that the sports or that the manpower dynamics in the sports would neoliberalize. Now, there's still a difference in the majors, but it's not the good kind of democracy, I would call it, because it's still cheaper for major league scouting programs to go to San Pedro de Macorís or to Venezuela and sign like 10, 15-year-olds or 14-year-olds for what they would pay for one college star in the U.S.
Yep. And
there's a better chance that one of those 15 is going to make it than that Bob Horner is going to make it, basically, right? Because that's kind of how I think about the comparison. But I mean, that's going to be resolved like in one way or another too. I mean, it's going to be resolved in Venezuela probably because the government's going to stop that shit. But anyway, yeah, I mean, so And I mean, that's another reason, like that these guys. And look, I think the most telling comment that Jamel Hill made in that clip that you played, Jason, is that when Laura Ingraham went off, she put money in everybody's pocket. and that's the key point, isn't it?
Yes, she did. And I watched that documentary. I don't know if you guys watched that Shut Up and Dribble documentary.
Right.
Yeah,
I had a question I wanted to ask.
Theater, man.
I had a question I wanted to ask you, Adolph. Is that one of the things that I've always found interesting in your earlier work is when you talked about race in the culture industry, particularly in the post-civil rights era, and you talked about basically how the way in which the Black image was being dispatched in pop culture created this kind of racial otherization that really kind of rendered Black people politically the social control. The question I want to ask you is that what is your analysis of the way in which race is used in sports or is exhibited in sports, and what are the social, if not political, ramifications, if at all, of how exactly it functions in the post-civil rights world? Is there any kind of a metaphor between the way pop culture is? Do you have distinctions in the way race is used particularly?
Well, that's really interesting, Pascal. But I think I sent this to Jason. But when I was still doing my column at the Village Voice in the late 90s, the sports editor, who had no idea that I followed sports at all or anything, just on a lark, asked me to write something about what was then the WWE version of conflict in the NBA. It's clean cut Kobe Bryant versus Boys in the Hood, Allen Iverson, basically. And he was kind of surprised with my take on it, but he agreed ultimately. But my take was that that the juxtaposition, like, it's all bullshit. It's all theater, right? Kobe had his shoe and his market, and Iverson had his shoe and his market, and the differences between them were like the differences between. Unfortunately, I've never followed wrestling, so I can't think of two of the, star and the villain who would come up against each other.
Hogan and Roddy Piper.
There you go.
The era, yeah.
And Roddy Piper, man. I mean, that just confirms all of my suspicions about the deep homoeroticism of pro in the pro wrestling. But anyway, but so I would say that, yeah. I mean, you can. Sports is like a template, right, through which, as is the entertainment industry generally, through which cultural contradictions get expressed, right? I remember when we were living in Atlanta in the 70s, and I began to notice that the people who went to pro sports events weren't just fans anymore. They were people coming in from the suburbs to enjoy a night out, right? So, like, they didn't know the rosters, or they didn't, they weren't geeks about it, right? And it kind of irked me, to be honest, because, but what the hell? It doesn't matter. But the more that professional sports has expanded its commercial footprint, the more you're gonna have little stuff like the morality plays. I mean, this is what Stern did to save the NBA in the 80s, right? I mean, nobody was watching that except me and 10 of my friends right on TV. And then he introduced this, Boston Celtics as the slow-moving, untalented, hard-working white guys, and the Lakers as a kind of slick, black and yuppie Showtime, right? I mean, whatever, which just made me root for Philadelphia and Houston and anybody, and Detroit, and anybody who would break in from outside that crap. Because I thought it was rehearsing like the racialist tropes that that are running through politics, and in a very cynical way, especially considering the Celtics' own history, right? As the first NBA team to start 5 black players. So there's that. But I will also say that as sports fans, and especially, but not just as sports fans of color, because other people do this too. I mean, there are reasons that all freedom-loving people hate the Dallas Cowboys and the Boston Celtics, and the vast majority of them hate the Denver Broncos. But there were strange things that happen out there. I mean, outliers. But no, I'm just joking about that. But because there's a level of like bar talk, right, at which we engage about this, and there's also deep realities in it, right? Like every year when quarterbacks are evaluated, when college quarterbacks are evaluated, right, they've at least gotten the commentators now to be cautious of saying things like he looks like a quarterback, right? But the shit is still there, right? It's the intangibles, or it's the reads the field, right? I mean, whatever. So there's enough of that stuff around, right, to keep people like me and my friends, I know that much, and a bunch of other people like that. It's kind of hard to put the right terminology on it. I mean, maybe Jason can, but there's a way. Well, it's like this. There's a term of art in pro wrestling called kayfabe, right? And that's the condition in which, like, everybody who's involved knows it's fake, right? The fans know it's fake. The performers know it's fake. Obviously, the promoters know it's fake. But it's almost like a reactionary populist appropriation of Bertolt Brecht, because kayfabe is the condition under which they all contrive to believe that it's real, right? Even though they know it's fake, because that enhances the theatrical satisfaction that one gets from being a pro wrestling fan. And I've never said this before, but there's a sense in which I suspect that those of us who read the equivalent of civil rights outrages through pro sports, the pro sports that we pay attention to, are kind of doing the same thing, right? But yes, it gets complicated. Colin Kaepernick was fucked over. Colin Kaepernick signed that Nike deal, and is like, the apotheosis of woke multinational capitalism, right? At the same time that he was genuinely done wrong by the NFL.
Yes.
And I can think of at least a half dozen starting quarterbacks whom he would be better than, right? And I mean, that's just in the NFC, right?
He had a season. He had a moment. Let's be honest. In this show, we're gonna talk turkey, and we're gonna also talk like real deal sports.
Yeah,
there was a moment, and if we think back to that, I think it was 2005 when the Niners choose Alex Smith over Aaron Rodgers, which I don't think Aaron Rodgers becomes the Aaron Rodgers that we know if he went to that very, very bad San Francisco 49ers team.
Yeah.
And Alex Smith took some severe lumps. I remember LeVar Arrington hitting him. It looked like a grown man beating a little boy. And Alex Smith is like 6'4".
Right.
And Alex Smith comes back.
Is that LeVar Arrington from Penn State, Big Ten player? Oh,
yes, one that blocked multiple kicks with chest.
Yeah. Just want to make sure. Big Ten shout out.
Yes.
Already when he was there, I can't remember.
Was what's his name there? What is it? Paterno? Yeah, he was there in the Paterno.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Before the scandal.
Oh yeah.
That was like I think
before the scandal.
Yeah. At least like almost a decade before the scandal.
Say again.
Were they already in the Big Ten when he was there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I watched him block multiple kicks in the NFL with his chest.
Yeah.
That's how high that motherfucker got up. So he hit Alex Smith. He hit Alex Smith to make him think about different career options.
Right.
Maybe this isn't for him. Alex Smith sticks around till Jim Harbaugh gets there, gets a new lease on life. And I watched Colin Kaepernick play at the University of Reno, Nevada. Number one, because we actually used to hang out in Reno, and it was fun to watch him play. And the family that I lived with actually went to go see Kaepernick play at a bowl game in San Francisco, or the new ballpark in San Jose, and loved him. You know, he set a record in college for passing and rushing yards. The quarterback had I think 10,000 passing yards and 5,000 rushing yards. Like, he really was a beast at Nevada Reno. And once Alex Smith went down, Kaepernick kind of put up some huge numbers.
Yeah.
They beat the shit out of the Packers, and he put up some crazy numbers in that game. Like, he brings the Niners back from 3 touchdowns down to almost winning the Super Bowl against the Ravens. And then the coaching staff and management takes this weird shift, and he has to take the brunt of that and has some very, very erratic play. And that becomes people's excuse for why he really got kicked out of the league. But I mean, there's way worse if you just want to go on numbers alone.
Yeah, that's the thing is there were so many. There's just maybe 6 reliable quarterbacks in any given NFL season, right? There's about 6 that somebody actually wants,
right?
And so this idea that he didn't even deserve to be on the practice squad, right? Because it's absurdity, right? And people would still walk out with their oh no, he just was that bad. But also too, I just want to throw some out there. Penn State joined the Big Ten in 1990. LeVar Arrington played for them in 1997. So they were Big Ten. He was there.
Yeah.
No, I remember that he was beating the shit out of
He
monster.
He was a monster. He didn't pan out in the league, and there's people that say that he had some steroid issues. That's why he didn't pan out, because he tore some muscles that
he was a couple of good years with the Redskins, didn't he?
I mean,
yeah, I think decent. Not bad, not terrible. That's why I kind of hold on to college. Ohio State players love to go to the NFL and suck ass.
We were talking about this. AJ Hawk had a serviceable NFL career.
Yeah, he did. Yeah,
serviceable NFL career. That's all I look for in a cat. Do you have a serviceable NFL career? But I don't know. Kaepernick, I really felt bad for him, and I was looking for a clip. Actually, I was looking for the news, because I remember when that happened, when he was sitting and it became a news story. So that was the first story when he sat, before the kneeling.
Oh yeah.
Because I wanted to hear what he said. And there's more, and I definitely edited a lot out that no one needs to hear about him rah-rahing the military and law enforcement. But the sitting I was actually more impressed with than the kneeling.
Did you see the what was it, Gwen? I can't. Gwen Berry.
Oh
no, she's the hammer throw. Glenn Beck. Gwen Berry.
Oh,
it does it for and now you got people all over the news saying that she needs to get kicked off the Olympic team and this, that, and whatever.
Yeah, but here's the thing, all that kind of stuff, man. It kind of, I don't know. I mean, first time is tragedy, the second is farce, right? I mean, when I just happened to be, because I had to go there for a board meeting in Seattle for the WTO demonstrations in '99. And when I got there, I was struck that a lot of young people, and this was a good warm up to Occupy, I guess. But they were pumped from the confrontations and for the confrontations. Oh wow! Ohio middle linebackers are like Duke. They're not that bad, but I take the point.
I can't disagree.
But anyway, but you can see with some of them, like it's almost like newsreel footage of the demonstrations at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in 1968 were running through their eyes, right? And I remember, obviously, John Carlos and Tommy Smith, and that was a powerful moment. But the powerful moment was the gesture, right? And it feels to me a little bit like the powerful moment now is reaching into the past to rehearse a gesture from an earlier era in another that emerged out of another context of problems. Right, but you know what I mean? And I don't know if I'm
this. This is really important because what I found with some of the younger kind of contemporary movement activist types in this this moment of the Black Lives Matter era is that you would literally find some of the kids would say things like, "We want to have our own civil rights movement."
Right. Yeah. Oof.
Literally. I've read articles written by individuals. There's one individual particularly that I know Adolph is not a fan of because I've heard him mention him. I'm not going to mention his name. Where he talk about that we want to have our own civil rights movement, as if the civil rights movement wasn't something that existed in a specific context of time period, challenging a certain hierarchy. This is not to say that racism doesn't exist in American society today, but what made up the legal, social, and political architecture of Jim Crow, which was rooted in a system in political economy as well as de jure and de facto law, distinguishes the current moment significantly. And I've talked to this with Jason over and over again, is that our generation was fed so much romanticized narratives of the civil rights movement through Eyes on the Prize and so on and so forth, that the politics of that era is decontextualized and it just becomes this kind of cool, faddish thing that we all applaud. And now we have a generation of people, some of whom want to kind of replicate that to feel like they've got to, quote unquote, make their contribution.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And I don't know if it was a brother or a sister, Toussaint, made a comment to that effect too. I mean, because people are much too affected by the iconography of the earlier periods, and people from my era are not blameless in this either, right? I mean, there's because it's easy to romanticize. All that stuff. I mean, look, a lot of us thought that we'd been defeated before 1975, right? So, I mean, the celebration. Well, yes, the victories are real and consequential, and and I know every time I hear like a young student say something now, like, I mean, desegregation didn't mean anything. A part of me feels like I wish I could drop him back in 1948 in Mississippi for like 6 weeks. But right, and that's the problem. It's and this is what we see in the popular culture too, right? That I can't remember if I mentioned this like on you guys' podcast before or someplace else, but Manohla Dargis, the film critic, when she was still at the LA Times, did a really nice piece in the early 2000s. It was occasioned by the appearance of the film Cold Mountain. And she pointed out that period films, like in Hollywood now, the only people who pay attention to giving a flavor of what life was actually like in the earlier period are the set and the costume design people, right? So great effort goes into reproducing the physical culture, right, of whatever the earlier moment was, but all of the sensibilities, even more and more the dialogue, the presumptions of the character of social relations are presentist, and projected back onto the past. And, you know, that can't help but be reactionary, because the point that comes from that is ultimately that what there is now is what there has always been and what always will be. Or to put it a little less Orwellian, maybe, is like the past was the inevitable and benighted unfolding toward the present, which is the millennium, basically. All right. And to see that happening with respect to the civil rights movement and the struggles of the 50s and 60s, without taking into account the broader context, right, of politics from the New Deal forward, doesn't do any of us any good. And this could be a moment to make a plug, actually. Like, I've got a new book. I got a book on the way out, and you guys are on the. I listed you on the author questionnaire. It said,
well, all right.
But it's kind of it's called the South, and it's sort of a rumination on the 3 decades, or the last 3 decades or so after of the Jim Crow era and the transition out of it. So, but anyway, close parens around the plug. But that's the real problem. And see, this is another problem, of course, with the notion that on the one side, yes, this is one of Touré's former schools, right? The Orleans Parish Sewage and Water Board. He worked there after he got out of college. But it's one of the problems with understanding the character or the nature of exploitation or oppression or whatever you want to call it that Black Americans have experienced as a trans-historical, trans-contextual racism. And on the flip side, therefore, it's a problem of understanding, the history of Black American political life. As Cedric puts it, as being a continuous Black freedom movement or Black liberation struggle, right? And the problem is that both those constructs depend on extracting any given moment of Black American circumstances in the U.S. from the history that they're actually embedded in, from the concrete problems that people were fighting against, the concrete objectives that they were fighting for, and that means we can't understand anything, right? Right. I mean, the only thing we understand. So that means the understanding of history becomes, and a Black political history becomes like a music video, basically. So.
So you mean you're not a fan of people saying the Black Liberation Struggle, LLCTM?
Not at all.
Before you came on, we were having this conversation. What were we exactly talking about right before Adolph came on?
We were talking about Adolph coming on.
We weren't talking about him though. Like, and in chapter 5 of, we were talking about something else. And you said that something.
No, well, I said that for some people in my generation, they believe that hip hop is their contribution to the Black liberation struggle, TMLLC.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Well, and that's what they do perceive the Black liberation struggle to be. And I know I can say this because I've written it. And when you can't shoot through a TV, but the first time that I saw Garza, Tometi, and Colors on a panel,
the founders of Black Lives Matter,
TMLLC.
Oh shit!
I was startled, right, and literally didn't know how to react, because Garza was the one doing most of the talking, but it was absolutely clear that she could see no distinction, like not a scintilla of daylight between the objective of building and advancing a political movement and burnishing and advancing a brand. That they were the same, right? And I mean, how else? Well, when you get down to it, I mean, like I asked a colleague of mine about this who just kind of dropped the piety out there. You know, you have to, but we have to acknowledge that this movement was created by these three queer black women. And I just sat there in a meeting. Why? I mean, in the first place, no individuals create a movement, right? So that's number one, right? That's a fundamental misunderstanding about how that happens and what a movement means. But what's the imperative, right? I mean, why do we always have to? But that's kind of so. Like I watched some clips from Idiocracy a few days ago.
Great film.
Yes, and well, one of them was the dude who's the Secretary of State, who after everything he said, would say, "Brought to you by Carl's Jr." Because they were paying him to say it, and I mean that's the vibe, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's important to acknowledge the brand. I mean, Coca-Cola, I don't know if they still have it, but they used to have, back in the 70s, a patent protection office that would send people around to bars and to restaurants and shit around the country to order a Coke, and if they were served anything other like Pepsi, that they would file a suit and shut the place down.
Jesus.
And that's kind of the way that was going, right? Like we've got to acknowledge that these three women started this thing, whatever the thing is, and I mean, so yeah, I don't know. All right, so the rant's over.
Well, that's I mean, like I feel like that was something like Pascal and I were talking about earlier today. You know, on just talking about like organizing and stuff like that, and you know, even like the fetishization of like all types of movements, aesthetics, you know, type of thing. It's like, hey, as long as I got this black flower fist in my hair, in my afro, you know, then I look like a panther and I'm all good. And you know, it was like we were just talking about like also was like it's great to look back. You got to look back to actually, you know, learn and build and all that stuff like that. But it's like if you're just gonna try and regurgitate something, you know, obviously it's not gonna work. Which, you know, as leftists, you know, dialectical materialism, right? But at the end of the day, you know, I guess we keep kind of running about like around and asking ourselves is like, well, how does any movement come out of it? You know, and like I think, yeah, even earlier today we were talking about like, you know, after the Bernie Sanders runs, there could have been something. After Occupy, there could have been something. You know, there's these instances where we can look back now over the past few years and say like, okay, the left, we missed an opportunity.
Right.
Yeah, I guess we're moved on to sports now.
The great Mike Davis told me when I interviewed Mike Davis, actually, right after the January 6th, was that when I asked him about Bernie Sanders, he was like, that was one of the big mistakes of the campaign, was that it never really got tied to any real movements.
Well, here's what I think the problem was with that, though. Wait for a minute, because I appreciate like I mean the impulse about this because that's right. And after 2016, I actually hoped and said this to people that Bernie would step away and go back into the Senate and work there, because I thought that, especially because you know, the 7 national unions that had endorsed this campaign were anchored at you know, institutional presence. And I thought there was a chance that we could build on the momentum of the 2016 campaign and at the state level, right? Start trying to reach out, because there were a number of boodles of important off-year state races coming up. And I mean, you know, like, I mean, elections are elections. I've never been like an electoralist. I don't think that's how you build a movement. But actually, I have a tagline for it, which is that you know, the electoral realm, I think, is the domain for consolidation of victories that have been won on the plane of social movement organizing. So that's my tagline. But anyway, I thought, so maybe I should get a TM LLC after that.
Yeah,
man. If you can't put it on a T-shirt.
No, yeah, that's right. Right, unfortunately. But I thought that there was potential there at the state levels, especially where the unions that had been involved in the Sanders campaign were embedded and had some institutional power. So, like, one of them would be the state of Illinois, but elsewhere in California. But that we'd be able to use the momentum that Sanders is putting, like a class agenda on the table, right? A working class agenda program on the table. It would open up to try to reach out and, to to disaffect the working class voters who hadn't voted for Sanders, like hadn't voted for Clinton, which means often enough who did vote for Trump. The problem was, and I was wrong, and I miscalculated in a couple of different ways. One of the ways I miscalculated, which is one that's not too common for me, is I was too optimistic. Because what happened was that the inertial tendency in every state that I know anything about, and I assume that the ones I didn't know about were probably like this too, but I'm not going to overclaim, that every state that I know anything about, the inertial tendency was to double down on the existing coalitions that progressives had been part of, right? And as if somehow increasing the intensity would turn into winning voters whom you hadn't gotten to before. So that didn't happen. And in fact, because Bernie didn't pay attention to me, not that he would have asked me, and not that I would have been in a position to tell him. But the fact that Bernie didn't pay attention to me turned out pretty well for us, because he ran again in 2020. And I think in 2020, and it may have been that it couldn't have happened in 2020 without what happened in 2016 and the time in between or whatever. But his campaign did leave the basis for subsequent work, like in a lot of places. We had it in South Carolina, for instance. But it's weird. I mean, talk about kismet, but with the negative sign. It's almost like 2 days after Bernie drops out of the race, we're on lockdown for COVID-19, right? So
I felt.
So I mean, that was a problem. Now, I don't think it's the end of the world, right? Because the problems that people had before COVID-19, they're going to have even more now, right? But then you've got this complicating factor of Biden and Bidenism and what that actually is and what we should make of it, and I mean how we should try to orient ourselves to it. But in a way, I think, see, the Occupy thing is a different story, but Sanders' campaigns, I think, were a very smart stab at accommodating to this bizarre thing that's happened within the American left since, I don't know, the 1970s or the 1980s, which is...
We say the 50-year counter-revolution here.
The 58 counter-revolution?
50-year counter-revolution.
Oh, yeah, no, that's right. I like that. Yeah, definitely. I think I mentioned that before. Yes, is that you've got a left, and Jane McAlevey is really great about this, that fundamentally doesn't understand the difference between mobilizing and organizing. And mobilizing, to put it simply, is gathering up all the troops that you have and pushing them to do something. And by contrast, I mean, organizing is trying to build and broaden a base, right? And there are a lot of reasons for it. We could probably talk all night about that, but the key thing is the sense that, well, the dangers are so great now, the pressures are so intense on us that the fascists are just over the next hill, and it's true they are. But the response is that we don't have time to try to do that slow, steady, drip kind of organizing, because the dangers are so great. And then I say to them stuff like, well, the reason that the danger is so great is that you hadn't been doing the shit you should have been doing for the last 50 years. So not doing it now isn't going to make things any better, right? But I mean, nonetheless, and there's all other kind of more or less elaborate and circumlocutory problems that are around us. But so I mean, Occupy couldn't be anything. Well, but it never was anything. And I'll just say this to be cantankerous, but I mentioned to a friend of mine a couple of days ago that I couldn't figure out early in the Obama first term why the corporate media was so jacked up about the Arab Spring, right? Why they were so enthusiastic about it, and I could see, whatever the color revolution that they said was the thing that was happening in Beirut. I mean, young Maronite women who looked like models who gathered at Martyrs Square in Beirut and sort of looked longingly off into the distance were photogenic. I could understand that, right? But it just seemed to me that everybody knew where all this stuff was going to wind up just because of the nature of what it was. And then, like, I watched the demonstrations, couldn't figure out where the social base of these insurgencies was within the countries they were in. And then after a while, I just started getting disturbed that way too high a percentage of the signs were in English, right? And
it's like those like immigrants coming across the border with like "Thank you, Joe Biden" T-shirts.
Oh yeah.
And it's like Fox News tag still on the back.
Yep, exactly. So like, anyway, I mean, like, I'd always been, I mean, suspicious. I mean, I was raised to be, I mean, suspicious of shit like the color revolutions, like in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Socialist republics. And then I did get more evidence that all that stuff was like CIA driven to some extent, right? I mean, the two long pieces in Non-Site by Marcy Smith on this question about the international peace movement are really worth working their way through. I mean, they're powerful stuff. But then about a year later, the Zuccotti Park thing broke out, and then suddenly the fascination with the Arab Spring made total sense to me, right? Because this was our version of the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring was Potemkin bullshit, right? And the combination of David Graeber and the ad busters and whoever else, were behind the Occupy thing. And, I don't want to be an asshole to the young people and maybe the not so young people who were involved. A lot of people were serious. Well, everybody, I guess, was serious about something or other. But the point is, like, a politics that takes a principled position not to have any principles or not to have any positions, right? Apart from acting in the moment, is a politics that comes from the advertising industry. And it's great, like, if young people got brought in, to see themselves as progressives or as activists or as leftists or whatever through that activity. But that's the kind of thing that always becomes the justification for the frivolous thing that's not the thing that we need, right? Is it? Yeah, well, it's not the thing we need, but it brings in young people and they get enthusiastic, and then they'll go on to, well, what are they going to do, right? I mean, I had lunches two Thursdays back to back with two colleagues of mine who are both very good, smart, progressive people in the midst of Occupy, and we had the identical conversation. It's amazing. First comment was, well, I mean, that Occupy thing is really kind of exciting. And I said, well, what's exciting about it? And each colleague said, and they weren't together, right? I mean, these were entirely different. Well, it's got people talking about inequality. And I said, well, each time. So who's talking about inequality now that you know who wasn't talking about it before, right? Because these were people who had moved in circles where people had always been talking about inequality. Each time I get the same response, which is, well, the New York Times is talking about inequality, and I say, yeah, well, but 3 months ago, the New York Times was talking about Kim Kardashian's divorce from the basketball player. So, and then 3 months from now, they're going to be talking about something else, right? I mean, this is all, and like, again, I'm really not trying to be a jerk, even though it seems like I might, or it might seem like I am. But my point is that what occupies the space, the cultural space, that would be occupied by a serious left in the United States is mainly occupied by liberals doing dress up, basically.
Ooh. And on that
note, we are the hour, but we have the patron section, Adolph, that we would like you, if you can.
Oh yeah, you got me for as long as you.
Oh,
you just said nothing but a word, brother, because we're going to, we've had our moment talking about sports, but since you've opened the door, or as we see, to talk about left strategy, which is a subject that we've been talking about, and this is Revolution and other podcasts several times. We're going to talk about left strategy, my kind of left strategy that I brought up about Black politics and a few other things, and we'd like to probe your mind even more, but we're going to do it in the patrons only section.
Okay.
And this is great content. We're glad you're here. And Jason, do you have anything to say that you would like to add?
No, Phoenix was saying hi to Pascal.
Phoenix, hello, how are you? Phoenix.
He gets excited when he sees bald Black people with glasses, and he saw Shaquille O'Neal at the post-game show, and he started yelling out, "Hi, Pascal."
Oh no.
That's funny.
They all look alike. So, but he called me Van Jones, so sometimes I'm like, yeah,
that's messed up.
Almost kicked him in his baby nuts. So, on that note, guys, we are out. If you are patrons, we'll see you in the bonus half.
Thanks again for having me, guys.